Good morning and welcome to the show. This show is coming to you live from Israel and Stockholm. And the show's name is Behind the Scenes with David BEDEIN. David, good morning.
Good morning from Jerusalem.
Good morning from Stockholm. What's on your mind today?
Well, there's a lot of things happening here. First of all, you may know that there's a continuing hudna, which is not a ceasefire. It's a hudna. It's a temporary respite in the shooting from Gaza. So that's on a lot of people's minds, and unfortunately, many people are deluding themselves into thinking it's some kind of a ceasefire like you had, which ended World War One on November 11th, 1918. It's not that at all. It's on our minds all the time, and that's something that is dominating the news and wondering what's going to be. Again, the delusions that this is a peace, that some kind of peace has broken out is simply not the case. You have noticed, and it's on my website. Our agency, the Center for Near East Policy Research, sent a crew. We work also with the Israel Resource News Agency. We sent a crew to Gaza for a period of 5 months to film how the children are being prepared to invade Israel. And they're invading Israel on the idea that it's a Zionist entity which is hosting Jewish communities on the grounds on the areas which were taken in 1948. And instead of resettling the Arabs into decent conditions, they've been put into UNRWA camps, temporary United Nations Relief and Work Agency camps, and 83% of the people who live in Gaza are living in those temporary facilities, temporary since 1949. So that's basically the illusion that what they're doing, that the people in Gaza are revolting because of an economic situation or because of restrictions on the coast. That's not the case at all. These people have the idea that they have the right to take back their homes from 1948, even though they don't exist. But cities like Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba, Sderot are built on those areas where their villages were. And again, they've been encouraged for 70 years to build not only philosophy, not only an ideology, but even a small army of young people ready to liberate that at any moment. And that's why I'm encouraging the Swedish government and other nations that give money for humanitarian services to make sure that they oversee the funds so the money doesn't go into military preparedness.
Yes, but I think what happens is that these governments are giving the Palestinians money in order to stop terrorism in their own countries. They're afraid that if they stop giving them money, the terrorism will come to them.
Right. What Lawrence is reflecting here is a long time tradition in European attitudes to the Middle East and to terrorists. That if we pay them enough, we give them enough unsupervised funds, then they're not going to conduct terror activity. Now that doesn't it maybe works for a short term, but it doesn't work for the long term, and that's an illusion because these people are in a long term war. No one imagined, David Ben Gurion, no one imagined that in 1940, that when the war broke out in 1948, it would last until today, and it keeps going on. Now they use the term conflict to describe the current situation. Well, that's a wrong term. Why is it a wrong term? I'm a social work professional. I deal with conflict with crisis management and conflicts and things like this. Yes, you have conflicts between ethnic groups, but this is a war, and there's a very very big difference between a conflict, which often has a solution, and a war that will not be resolved until one side or the other wins. Now, the kingpin of the war against Israel is not the PLO or even Hamas, but it's rather the Arab countries that declared war on 48 and never stopped the war. And basically, the PLO and Hamas are their proxies in continuing the war. Now, in Israel, which is a prospering country and a very, very, I mean, since I've moved to Israel, which was 48 years ago, the country has tripled in size. When I came here, it was 3 million people. Now there's 9 million people. And it's an amazing thing to watch. And there's a booming economy, and there's a booming arts and festivals. You may know that the Eurovision this year will be in Israel. So people don't want to hear about the word war. Conflict they can deal with. not war. On the other hand, I don't work for the government of Israel. I don't work for the Ministry of Tourism. I simply run two small private agencies, one a research office, the Center for Near East Policy Research, and the other the Israel Resource News Agency. And we speak what we describe what we see, report what we see, research what we see, and we're honest. And therefore, you're not going to get from us the party line that, well, there's a conflict, and if we win the next, if Israel wins the next battle, everything will be okay. Well, that's not the case. The problem we face in Israel is that things are localized. In other words, last week on your program, I brought a Qassam missile with me. Now, I brought that Qassam missile with me to a studio in Tel Aviv, where I showed what a missile looks like and why people are so scared. And when I left Sderot with the missile, there had been 400 attacks on the southern region, and people were running for their lives for several days. When I got to Tel Aviv, there was a marathon of people running in Tel Aviv for fun. So people run for their lives in the south, and people run for their fun in Tel Aviv. And no one knows about even if they have cousins, brothers, parents, whatever. One section of the country, more or less, doesn't have any idea what's going on in the other section, and it's a sectoralized kind of a terror campaign.
Okay. Can I move on to another subject?
Absolutely.
Okay. After the Qassam missiles that were fired from Gaza into Israel, the defense minister, I think Lieberman, resigned.
That's correct.
And did he say exactly what the problem was?
He said that the outgoing defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, he said that the response from Israel, just to sum it up, was a very weak response, and it did not provide any security or protection for the people of Israel. Israel allowed $15 million in cash to come into Gaza, which was used, of course, to buy petrol for the people. And on the other hand, what Lieberman revealed was a lot of the money went to the families of people who had died in the fight, and also to the leadership of Hamas. So he said this is ridiculous. So he basically, in my assessment, whereas this policy was made by Lieberman, he didn't want to bear the consequences of the policy in an election.
Okay. And is there a new Minister of Defense?
Well, this is what's very interesting. Over the next few days, weeks, months, we don't know how long it's going to be, Netanyahu, the prime minister, will be assuming the role of defense minister. So he will take all responsibilities on himself. Whether that's a temporary arrangement or not, we do not know. We shall see. Now, in 1967, you may know, the prime minister of Israel, that was Levi Eshkol, was also the defense minister, but there was such pressure for a strong leader that he took in Moshe Dayan. So there may be pressure. Let's see what happens. By this time next week, if we speak again on Behind the Scene with David BEDEIN next week, we'll have an idea as to whether or not there will be a clamoring for replacement of Mr. Netanyahu as defense minister, or whether he'll continue.
Okay. There is a comparison I'd like to draw. Today we have a war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
Right.
And there's very little criticism of Saudi Arabia the way that they would criticize Israel if Israel would go to war with Gaza.
Absolutely. I mean, and my father worked for an American oil company, and my father in 1974 said Saudi Arabia will never ever conduct a oil boycott of the United States again. What they will do, which is still very strong, is that if they do have any ways of influencing America, they'll do it by maybe pulling their investments out. The Saudis have a very important veto power over the Western economies by their investments.
Nope, I understand it. And even in the United Nations, they're
absolutely.
They're on
now. There's an illusion that the Saudis are some kind of a peace partner or whatever. Now, the Saudis do not like Iran, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that they're an ally. There's an expression in the Middle East that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, that's not the case.
I understand
You
Saudi
know,
Arabia is, well, uh, why is Israel so demonized and the other Arab countries just get a free card to do whatever they want, including killing journalists?
that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, to think of what happened to a Washington Post correspondent who was a native Saudi, who was no friend of Israel, by the way. He's also quite an anti-Semite. He's the guy who came up with the theory that on September 11th, 2001, it was a Jewish conspiracy to blow up the World Trade Center. So he wasn't a very respectable person. On the other hand, to be able to have a guy like this, assassinated, journalists, and boy, they do it with class. Cutting him to pieces. Now they could have said we didn't know the knife was loaded, but it doesn't work that way. This was a very clear message that if an Arab journalist gets out of hand, this is what's going to happen to them. The Arab journalists working outside of the Arab countries. Wow, that's quite a message.
Yes, it was a terrible thing. I used to
Mm-hmm.
work in the World Trade Center in New York, and I used to take packages around in the Trade Center. And on the very
Mm-hmm.
top of the Trade Center was the tax office, the Internal Revenue Service. There are many
Really?
people that don't know that Internal Revenue Service was on the top floor. And and then the telephone company occupied also offices at the very top. And the World Trade Center was full of embassies. There were lots of embassies that had their offices there. So when bin Laden took out the World Trade Center, he actually destroyed the tax service, the telephone company, and lots of other major companies.
Well, let me add something to that also. One thing I know, I was in New York at the time, and then I went to Washington. Again, during this period of time, I watched the World Trade Center as it imploded. I have pictures. It's on my website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. You look under WTC, you'll see it. But in Washington, the Pentagon was hit. That's the American, defense, the Vatican, if you want to call it. And it had exact 9:15 in the morning, exactly as the general chiefs of staff were getting together for their weekly meeting, and the ROTC headquarters, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is the American Reserve Office, was also destroyed, and their computer was destroyed. Now, so the logical thing that Lawrence would ask me, well, what about the alternative, the backup files? Well, the backup files were in the next room, and they were destroyed. So if America wanted to call up its reserves that day, they couldn't. The strategic effect of the Saudis, these Saudi hijackers, right, doing what they did, the strategic effect has not always been understood. Um, Lawrence, you've just added a couple of interesting points in terms of embassies and U.S. government offices that were destroyed in the World Trade Center, the effect of hitting the Pentagon has always been underestimated.
Yep, absolutely. All right. David, is there anything else you wanted to add this morning that's on the
Well,
news in Israel?
I think the issue of the myth of the humanitarian crisis is over now. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, yesterday publicized that they have no financial problems. Something that I've worked on for a while because we talked to my staff talked to the entire list of donor nations which appear on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and the donor nation says we said very clearly that we are sending on all the aid without any problem. And yesterday, UNRWA actually said we have no financial issue, no financial problem. Their $1.2 billion has been received. So the time has come to say that, well, UNRWA did hire a public relations firm known as Marathon Strategies, and they did a very good job to convince the world that they were suffering the last 6 months, ever since 7 months since President Trump of the United States pulled the plug on UNRWA. On the other hand, it was what you call today fake news, because when UNRWA pulled out, other nations came in, such as Sweden, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. So that is that chapter of Middle East negotiation and Middle East history of a supposed humanitarian crisis has been closed. But I can guarantee you that it will be raised again and again and again, because all you have to do is take 50 or 60 children who look starving and put them in front of the media, and you'll get your point across. And that is the essence of Behind the Scene with David BEDEIN. And I thank you for having me on your show.
Okay, David, let's call it a wrap. And goodbye from Stockholm.
And shalom from Jerusalem.